On October 14, 2022, in a building courtyard in Paris, France, a homeless man stumbled upon a large black trunk. The horrific sight that lay inside would haunt him and the most experienced of officers. Investigation into this mysterious grisly death would lead to an unusual suspect whose actions shocked and enraged an entire country. Who was this victim, and who was the monster who had murdered them and stuffed their body inside a plastic box? Shades of Murder. I am your host, Alita Caldwell. In this podcast, I discuss cases of murder from around the world and throughout history, attempting to unravel the layers of darkness that help make humans into monsters. Please be forewarned that each episode contains specific and at times very graphic and disturbing details of the case. This show is not intended for all audiences, and listener discretion is strongly advised. Some stories make us believe in the existence of evil when there is no diagnosis of a severe mental illness or a nightmarish childhood background to grasp the barbaric actions of an offender. What else is left besides viewing them solely as a monster? The depths of depravity and the void of emotion portrayed by the perpetrator can only be explained by the unexplainable darkness of another soul. This is the story of the devil monster of France, Dahbia Benkired. Paris is an absolutely mesmerizing city. The capital of France is known by many, particularly by its residents, as the New York City of Europe. Paris is truly a remarkable place, full of centuries-old buildings, astonishing museums, and breathtaking landmarks. The arrondissements or districts are lined with unique shops and picture-perfect street cafes. Paris has long been on my bucket list, and the year before this horrible tragedy occurred, I took myself there to celebrate earning a degree. Even though it was still in the midst of the great pandemic, I made the most of my journey and loved the experience. I have never been to New York City, but I can only imagine it holds the same kind of feverish global energy that Paris does. It was in December, mind you, but the streets were still crowded and flourishing with people everywhere. The roads were riddled with traffic jams and pedestrians ignoring the lights, running around the taxis to reach the next block. There's an undeniable, magnetic, international energy there with every imaginable kind of culture represented. My lifelong association with Paris being the height of fashion did not let me down. Everyone was very fashionable and classy in an effortless way. The people are also much warmer and friendlier than other cultures often depict them as. The French simply have more manners and are quiet, and they expect the same in return. I barely spoke any French, and my phone would not work outside the country. I walked everywhere with a local map and just my visual sense of direction, which, thanks to hiking in the woods with my boyfriend over the years, had significantly improved. I would just leisurely stop and eat and explore whenever I felt like it. Something about the people and the places I visited made me feel very welcome and relaxed, as if it could be my second home. I have been waiting more than 3 years to discuss this case. For most of my longtime listeners, you probably have noticed that I don't cover cases that have not been handled within the criminal justice system, unless they are murders which remain unsolved or there has been injustice for the victim and their family. I prefer not to cover cases that I feel are incomplete. That is, no one has been held accountable for the crime. Many podcasts have covered this case, but not in its entirety, because it was only in October of this year that the story came to some kind of closure. Paris is a sprawling, massive metropolitan city divided into 20 diverse and unique arrondissements or districts. Like any large urban city, sections and districts are known for being more appealing and safer than others. The 19th arrondissement, where this story takes place, is known for being somewhat sketchy. Although it does have its lovely quiet parts, especially for families, it has also been associated with a lot of petty crimes and drug trafficking. That is more of a cautionary tale for tourists rather than its residents, though, and most never encounter any problems. This is one of those stories that serves as a reminder that although stranger danger is extremely rare, when it does occur, it often unfolds into a parent's worst nightmare. On the afternoon of October 14, 2022, 12-year-old schoolgirl Lola Daviet disappeared. Her parents expected her home after middle school, which was only a short walk away. When she never returned, they immediately sensed something was wrong. Lola was a darling and very responsible young girl. She was respectful and considerate to her parents and would never have just run off without telling them. Lola's parents were concierges or caretakers of the residential building where the family lived. They immediately contacted the police and reported their daughter missing. Officers began searching around the communal areas of the apartment complex. Since her father was the caretaker of the building, he immediately began reviewing the CCTV footage. At 3:15 p.m., he watched as his daughter Lola entered the building with an unknown woman. Lola appeared to be helping the woman inside with some heavy luggage. Then he watched in horror when less than 2 hours later at 4:59 p.m., this same woman, now wearing different clothing, was carrying 2 pink suitcases, one which she used to prop open the door. The woman left, and within a few minutes, she was seen awkwardly dragging a heavy black trunk covered in a blanket down the hallway towards the lobby. One of the neighbors even helped hold the door open for her. Only a few hours later, a homeless man walking in the courtyard of the building stumbled upon what appeared to be a plastic trunk. He opened it to see what lay inside. The man was horrified at what he saw. Underneath some layers of clothes appeared to be a child. The man immediately contacted the authorities. When investigators arrived at the scene, they were not prepared for the disturbing and brutal sight of 12-year-old Lola Daviet's corpse. She was nude and had multiple deep gashes and cuts on her body. The young girl's face was covered in duct tape. The once vanished child had now become a victim of an atrocious murder. A forensic pathologist would determine that the official cause of death was cardiorespiratory failure due to asphyxiation and cervical compression. Many large cuts had been made to the girl's face and back. Her neck had been sliced so deeply by a bladed weapon that her head was partially severed. The girl had also been a victim of brutal sexual assault. Witnesses at the scene told the police that they saw the woman leave the building around 5 p.m. carrying a large trunk, which she stuffed inside a friend's car. Another witness said the suspect had offered him money to assist her in moving the trunk. CCTV footage collected from a nearby bar on Rue Manin minutes after she left the building showed the same woman with 2 very heavy suitcases casually sitting at a table. In a bizarre and brazen moment, a man whom she was talking to on the street sits down at the table with her. He asks her what's inside the trunk, to which she tells him she is selling kidneys and encourages him to look inside. At one point, the woman does open the trunk and peers inside. It was later realized that she was looking at Lola Daviet's body. The man didn't think too much about the weird transaction he had with the stranger at the time, but then hours later he heard about the grisly news about a 12-year-old girl being found deceased inside an eerily similar-looking trunk. He immediately contacted the police and reported the odd encounter he had with the woman at the cafe. Investigators soon learned that the sister of the suspect lived at the same building complex. When they entered the apartment, they discovered what they believed to be the weapons used in the crime. There were a pair of scissors, an oyster knife, which is what it sounds it should be used for, to shuck open an oyster, and what was described as an IKEA knife. They were all spattered with blood. The CCTV footage in the area, along with witness statements and phone records, led investigators to locate the suspect. Slightly before 8 a.m. the morning after the heinous murder of this young girl, the suspect was apprehended at a friend's house in Bois-Colombes, a suburb of Paris. 3 suspects, in addition to the murder suspect, were arrested and held in custody. 1 man and 1 woman, identified as the main suspect's older sister, was later released without charges. An older man who was suspected of sheltering the suspect remained in custody. It was later learned that the man was a friend of the suspect. She had persuaded him to drive her, the 2 suitcases, and the trunk back to his home. According to this man, Dahbia Benkired, the suspect, took a chauffeur-driven car, which the man had arranged for her, back to the residential building where he had picked her up with the trunk. When officers brought her older sister Friha in for an interview, she told police that her sister was unemployed and homeless. She lived with a friend outside of Paris, but sometimes she let her younger sister stay at her apartment with her. Dahbia's sister told investigators that her younger sister always had trouble fitting in, and during the last month, she had started sleepwalking. She said that she would wake up and say strange, incoherent things. Friha described her sister as being bipolar, even calling her a bad seed. She claimed not to know anything about the crime and was later released without facing any charges. On several occasions, a witness referred to as Mr. K noticed the suspect hanging out. She was known around the 19th arrondissement for begging. Dahbia would call out to passersby, sometimes asking them for a cigarette, other times trying to scrounge up a few coins. He did not know the woman personally, but he saw her from time to time and wondered whether she might be a little unstable, even a little unhinged. The suspect in the murder of 12-year-old Lola Daviet was identified as 24-year-old Dahbia Benkired. The main suspect was held in custody for 48 hours before being brought before the Parisian Judicial Court. During this period, she was interviewed 6 times by the police. The first 3 interviews yielded nothing for investigators. The suspected killer swore that she was not involved in any way with the assault and murder of the young French girl. When investigators first brought Dahbia Benkired into the interrogation room, they showed her grotesque, disturbing pictures of the young girl's corpse. The only thing she said was again after each photo. When the gendarmerie or Parisian police showed the suspect the pictures of Lola's mutilated dead body, she said, and I quote, "I too was raped and I saw my parents die in front of me." It is unknown whether her claims were ever true. Dahbia Benkired initially flat out denied being involved and kept repeating to investigators, "I don't want to answer you." Then she began telling them events that were contradictory with one another and were not at all convincing. The suspect offered far-fetched, bizarre versions of what happened that day. However, something in the interrogation room shifted, and during the 4th interview, Dahbia Benkired broke her silence. Before confessing, she looked at the investigators and smiled, telling them, "I've always wanted to be a police officer." According to the suspect's confession, the following sequence of events occurred on the afternoon of October 14th, 2022. She had woken up that morning around 10 or 11, had breakfast with her older sister at her apartment, and then she went for a walk. She just walked aimlessly and ended up on the metro towards Champs-Élysées. She ended up going to her former boyfriend's residence, where the two got into a terrible argument. Alone now, along with her 2 suitcases, she returned to her sister's apartment building. Dahbia Benkired was standing near the entrance with 2 overly sized pieces of luggage. She didn't have her own pass since it was her sister's apartment, not hers, and the caretaker had refused to give her one. Then she appeared, a young girl, just returning home from school. Dahbia asked the girl for help with her suitcases. The young girl was happy to assist in opening the door, but when the woman said she could really use her help getting them upstairs and inside her sister's apartment, the girl told the lady that she wasn't supposed to go inside a stranger's place. But the friendly and pretty older woman reassured the young girl that everything's fine, everything would be okay. She just really needed her help to get the suitcases up the stairs and inside her sister's apartment. the kind and trusting young girl decided to go with her. Before she entered the apartment, she begged the older woman not to hurt her. Once inside the apartment, the woman turned on her. She threatened to kill her if she didn't do what she was told. Dahbia forced the terrified young girl to wash herself in the shower. She slammed the girl's head against the wall of the shower and sexually violated her, vaginally and anally. She also forced her to perform sexual acts upon her. Dahbia described how Lola had turned into a ghost. She didn't say a word. She slapped the girl, afraid that she would tell her family about the assault. It is not known at the exact moment. Over the more than hour and a half horrific assault on this young girl. But the attack turned deadly. Dahbia grabbed a pair of scissors and began to stab the girl over and over again. She slashed at her face and multiple times across her back. Then she pulled out a box cutter and slit the girl's throat and stabbed her numerous times with the scissors. Dahbia grabbed duct tape, sealing the girl's mouth shut, and wrapped the tape around her face. It is believed that Lola Daviet was still alive when she taped up the young girl, leaving her to suffocate to death. Dahbia Benkired admitted to investigators that she had lured Lola to her sister's apartment, where she, quote-unquote, committed harm of a sexual nature and other violent acts against Lola that caused her death and hid her body in the trunk. On Monday, October 17, 2022, Dahbia Benkired spoke not a word as she faced the 3 judges who were investigating this atrocious crime. The 24-year-old woman was charged with the murder of a minor under 15 years old. Under French law, Article 221/4 of the French Penal Code, killing a person under the age of 15 is considered an aggravating circumstance, which brings with it the possibility of a life sentence. Dahbia Benkired was also charged with rape with acts of torture and barbarism. As defined by the French Penal Code, when rape is preceded, accompanied by, or followed by torture and acts of barbarity, the crime is punishable by life imprisonment. During another court hearing, she withdrew the confession, claiming that it had all been a dream. None of it was real. Then she told the police that she was battling a ghost and had to defend herself from being stabbed. Dahbia Benkired also made the statement that it would be impossible for me to kill a child. The Attorney General reported there were a minimum of 38 wounds inflicted on 12-year-old Lola Daviet's body. Her rib cage had been perforated by at least 2 stabbings made from a pair of scissors, and her skull had been partially split. The young girl endured unimaginable terror, suffering, and pain before she died. Strangely, it was also revealed that there were post-it notes that had been written in red ink, placed on the soles of the girl's feet. On them were the numbers 0 and 1. The investigation had taken an even darker and more mysterious turn. There is no known reason as to why Dahbia Benkired wrote these numbers. In numerology, 0 means nothing and everything. The great void. 1 symbolizes unity, the beginning, the source of all existence. Together, they symbolize infinite potential. It could also hypothetically represent binary code, where 1 means something is receiving electricity or it is on, and 0 means that it is not, it is off. The investigation failed to ever unearth, nor did the suspect ever tell why she wrote these numbers on her victim's feet. But I doubt it was for no purpose, at least at the time of the murder. These numbers held significance. Investigators quickly learned that Dahbia Benkired was an illegal foreign national. She initially came to France in 2016 legally on a student resident permit. But something went off in her life along the way. In 2018, she was the victim of a domestic violence incident in which the details are unknown. Dahbia Benkired never finished school. She was unemployed and found herself living on the streets, often prostituting her body. In August 2022, only 2 months before this tragedy occurred, the woman was stopped at an airport in Paris with expired student papers. Since the woman did not have a criminal record, she was not detained. Instead, Dahbia Benkired was given a 30-day notice to leave France, but she ignored the request. Unfortunately, the OQTF order, also known as an obligation to leave French territory order, failed to meet its purpose. It is a voluntary order to leave the country within 30 days. However, they are notorious for not being followed up on, with only 1 in 10 being observed. What made the circumstances even more alarming is that Dahbia Benkired was an Algerian national, and they are at the top of the foreigners known for abusing the system in France. When news of this child murderer's immigration status was released to the public, the community was outraged by the failure of the system. Many members of the Republican Party and other ultra-conservative groups looked to blame the liberal, lax immigration policies for causing Lola Daviet's death. It was the fuel the far right could only have dreamed of that proved that illegal immigrants were dangerous to the citizens of France and must be handled more harshly. The response to Dahbia Benkired's nationality lit a fire of ethnic-centered bias and invoked a hatred towards Algerians. Eric Zemmour, a far-right party minister, bought up online domain names with the victim Lola's name to control the narrative. Others attempted to connect her murder to various actions on the part of President Macron, including tributes made to that year's Ballon d'Or winner, which is an annual football award, Karim Benzema, who happened to be of Algerian descent. Some extreme far-right groups even tried to make a correlation between the young girl's death and Algerian protesters who were killed by French police during the same week Lola was killed in 1961. They raided social media, placing full blame upon the chaotic and loose illegal immigration policies and procedures established under President Macron that led to the girl's murder. On X, Jordan Bardella, president of France's far-right National Rally Party, wrote that the suspect had no business being in France. For a right proponent, Eric Zemmour wrote how Lola's murderer should never have crossed her path. The Rassemblement National and other far-right organizations used social media to arouse anger and spark demonstrations for all victims of crime in Lola's name across the country, using the hashtags Manif pour Lola and Justice pour Lola. During protests, crowds of hundreds sang a rendition of the national anthem of France, shouting "Remigration," death to pedophiles, and "This is our home." The people demanded change and justice, not just for Lola, but for everyone impacted by violence. In the National Assembly, Prime Minister Elizabeth Warren called upon the ministers who wanted to address the murder to have a little decency and respect for the pain of the family. One minister in particular declared that the suspect of this barbaric act should not have been in French territory. It is difficult to argue that this was true. Justice Minister Eric Dupond-Moretti accused the right of using the coffin of a 12-year-old girl to further their political agenda. Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin also condemned the indecent behavior of these politicians who were using this tragic story of a girl's murder for their electoral campaigns. What both sides agreed upon was to allow a moment of silence for the slain young girl. While these parents were grieving and dealing with the most unimaginable pain and sorrow over the tragic loss of their daughter, they also had to deal with the onset of questions surrounding foreign nationals. Lola's parents were revolted by how politicians were trying to exploit their daughter's death to prove their stance on tougher immigration policies. They wanted nothing to do with the issue. Lola's parents begged for the end of the politicization of their daughter's death. They asked that politicians stop any use of the name and image of our child for political ends. President Emmanuel Macron described the crime as atrocious and invited the family to the Élysée Palace. There he offered his deepest condolences and told them he would do everything in his power to unite the opposing sides and to support their family in this time of pain and grief. President Macron, who was at the center of the right and far right's blaming of illegal immigration policies for Lola Daviet's death, told the press that her parents have asked that all sides show their support instead of increasing the pain they are experiencing. The media lashed back at politicians, shaming them for exploiting a child's death to reignite their anti-immigration beliefs. Although President Macron strongly discouraged the use of Lola's death within political arenas, in late 2022, he came forward with concerns of his own based on crime data. He stated that, and I quote, "If we look at crime in Paris today, we cannot fail to see that at least half of the crime comes from people who are foreigners, either illegal immigrants or those waiting for a residence permit. In any case, they're in a very delicate situation, often coming in through these illegal immigration channels." The Officer of the Interior Minister further supported this claim. According to their crime statistics in Paris, foreigners, both those who were residents and those of illegal immigration status, comprised 48% of arrests and those held in custody within the first 6 months of that year. Their purpose was to illustrate their overrepresentation in all areas of crime. However, what was not addressed was the nationality of the majority of the victims. Although many illegal immigrants have indeed committed crimes in France, most of them have been committed against their own people and not against French nationals. According to crime statistics on homicide in France, specifically in Paris, the majority of murders that occur are intraracial, meaning they are within the same race. Similar to crime data in many other nations, in particular the United States, most violent crimes, including homicide, are committed against others of the same race or ethnic background as the perpetrator. France had experienced this kind of dangerous rhetoric and political jargon before. In 1973 in Marseille, a bus driver was murdered by a mentally ill man who was of Algerian origin. The hatred, which rose from several articles, triggered the murder of 20 innocent Algerians. In the United States, we have also seen this kind of hate speech and profiling of races and ethnic groups result in similar acts of hate crimes and violence. The fact remains that the murderer was under an expulsion order from France that was never enforced. If they had deported Dahbia Benkired, Lola Daviet would not have been held captive, raped, tortured, and brutally murdered. These are facts that can't be denied. However, there is no connection between her being Algerian and the vileness of her actions. The crimes of Dahbia Benkired have nothing to do with Lola's nationality or her own. According to Lola Daviet's family, if their daughter's murder is to bring to light any social or political issue, then it is one of criminal responsibility, including harsher punishment. The impact Lola Daviet's death had on the people of France far surpassed being shocked and horrified by what had been done to this innocent, beautiful child. It enraged the community. Discussions regarding the protection of children, violence against minors, and the justice system's response to the most vile of crimes resurfaced, and many were justifiably angry and fed up with the lack of severe punishment. At the entrance of the multi-story apartment complex where the little girl lived and died lay rows and rows of hundreds of bouquets, candles, letters, and notes for the innocent victim. A book of grievances was set up in the town hall of the 19th arrondissement for members of the community to share their condolences. On October 24, 2022, Lola Daviet's funeral service was held in the Collegiate Church of Les Lares, Pas de Calais, her mother's hometown. The funeral service was open to all, but the family requested that it stay peaceful and not have any sign of political conflict or media disruption. During the memorial, her brother spoke the following, choking on his tears. "Lola, my adorable little sister, I hope you can hear me in heaven. Sadly, you left us too soon. I never had a chance to say how much I loved you. I hope I was there for you when you needed help. We're going to miss you." Lola Daviet's family was shattered by her horrific murder. They had lived a simple, modest life, but they were a very happy and loving family. After they lost little Lola, they decided to move away from Paris. The tragedy of losing their young daughter, especially in such a violent and deplorable manner, destroyed her family. But they hung on to hope that one day justice would prevail. Tragically, Lola's father, Johann, couldn't hold on any longer. When he lost his little girl, he drowned in his demons. He would drink from the moment he woke up to when he went to bed each night. Within a few years, Lola's father had killed himself with alcohol. He died in February of 2024 at the age of 49 years old. Before his death, Lola Daviet left a heartbreaking note on the door of the apartment where his daughter was brutally tortured and killed. It said, and I quote, "My darling, I still don't understand why there was so much cruelty and barbarity towards you. You who were so kind. I can't wait to see you again." The note was signed, "Your dad, who loves you for life." Not only was Lola's mother, Delphine, haunted by the tragic, horrible loss of her only daughter, but now she had lost her husband too. The senseless attack on Lola Daviet had ripped away two innocent, beautiful souls. Meanwhile, the focus of the investigation now centered around whether the woman who had committed these heinous, brutal acts of rape, torture, and murder had been suffering from a psychiatric disorder at the time of the offense. Only time and expert psychiatric evaluations could determine whether or not she was criminally responsible under French law. Since the early 19th century, criminal responsibility has been the foundation of criminal law in France. There are 3 categories of criminal responsibility. The first category is a lack of criminal responsibility. This stems from a person who was suffering from a psychic or neuropsychic disorder at the time of the offense, which abolished their ability to control their actions. The second is diminished criminal responsibility. This category is designated for individuals who psychiatric or neuropsychiatric disorder impaired their ability to control their actions. The third is full criminal responsibility, which indicates full awareness and the ability to control their actions. To determine the appropriate level of criminal responsibility, a judge or the court may recommend one or more expert psychiatrists. If an expert's assessment concludes that the individual lacked criminal responsibility as defined under the statute, a judge can declare the person as not being criminally responsible, and therefore is not subject to incarceration. However, the judge can impose certain measures or precautions. These can include prohibiting access to the victim or their family, or placing restrictions on where they live and where they can travel. In the majority of cases, a judge will impose an order of involuntary hospitalization in a psychiatric hospital. However, if the individual is considered to be a threat to other safety, maximum security psychiatric unit they may be placed in. 10 such units in France are monitored and operated by the Public Health Division. Although it was determined that Dahbia Benkired suffered from personality disorders, the accused was evaluated by 3 different psychiatrists. They all concluded that her judgment was not impaired due to a mental illness at the time of the offense, and that she didn't have a treatable condition. The psychiatrists and psychologists all believed Dahbia Benkired had psychopathic tendencies that were incurable. She was described as not being schizophrenic, but a person who exhibited a schizotypal personality. Without being entirely delusional, psychiatrists and psychologists both said that she showed cold or flat affect, abnormal thoughts, and statements that were detached from reality. Dahbia Benkired also conveyed no remorse or regret over her actions. For 3 long years, Lola Daviet's killer was examined by multiple psychiatrists and psychologists while she was held in prison. It was believed by many during this lapse in time that she would be declared mentally unfit to stand trial and never face any real form of punishment. Dahbia Benkired would likely be diagnosed with a severe mental illness and be sent to a psychiatric facility for the criminally insane, instead of being incarcerated. Then in 2025, almost 3 years to the date, in which she had viciously tortured and murdered this beautiful little girl, Dahbia Benkired would face what she had done. The psychiatrist did not believe her to be mentally ill, although she exhibited many signs of psychopathy. Dahbia Benkired finally admitted to everything she had done to Lola Daviet and was declared competent to stand trial. Once Dahbia Benkired was deemed competent to stand trial, the prosecutor's office asked for the case, to which the judge agreed. Even when a defendant pleads guilty to the charges, under French law, a full trial is still required to be held in front of the Cour d'assises, the court that hears the most extreme of crimes. It is not merely a matter of guilt which is determined during the trial, but both sides present evidence and aggravating and mitigating circumstances to convey both motive and intent. Meanwhile, the death of Lola Daviet continued to create major controversy and conflict between the political parties and division amongst women. Alice Cordier, founder of the group Nemesis, stood in front of the Parisian criminal courthouse when the trial began to, and I quote, denounce the dangerous impact of mass immigration on Western women so that this subject becomes a public debate. She attacked feminists, claiming that since most are associated with left-wing politics, they are more concerned about the welfare of the accused, who had allegedly been a victim of trauma and rape, than they are there to support Lola and her family. There is no evidence to support this allegation she made against individual feminists or feminist-based organizations in France. Rather, all it did was create more conflict and division amongst the people. On Friday, October 17, 2025, almost 3 years to the day that 12-year-old Lola Daviet had been viciously raped, tortured, and murdered, her sadistic perpetrator would finally face the scales of justice. Lola's family and their supporters arrived at the courthouse, adorned in matching white t-shirts. The now infamous portrait of the young girl smiling. On them were written the words, "You'll be the sun of our lives and the star of our nights." Before the trial began, Lola's brother, Thibault, was granted a moment to directly address his sister's killer. The young man bravely looked at Dahbia Benkired and said to her, "We would like you to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, to all of France and to us." The reasons why Dahbia Benkired decided to rape, torture, and mercilessly kill this innocent young girl were never revealed. Her story kept changing during the police's interrogation of her and throughout her trial. First, she claimed that she wanted vengeance upon Lola's mother, who had refused to give her a building pass since she wasn't a resident. Then she said she had gotten into a huge argument with her ex-boyfriend that day. When she saw Lola so vulnerable, she saw what was the perfect target to release her rage toward. Dahbia Benkired told the court that it wasn't little Lola she wanted to hurt that day. It was him. That she loved him so much, but he had insulted her and told her he would never be the father of her child. She felt full of revenge and hatred when she crossed the path of Lola. Dahbia Benkired said that he had a gun and she had planned to shoot him with it, but wasn't planning on killing him. It was only 15 minutes after she had this heated altercation with her former lover that Dahbia spotted Lola returning from school. She claimed that she didn't initially plan on harming Lola Daviet, but once she had convinced the young girl to help carry the suitcases upstairs to her sister's apartment, she decided she was going to hurt her. Then, on the second day of the trial, Dahbia Benkired's story as to why she tortured and killed the girl changed. Now she blamed it on a combination of drugs she was on. Dahbia Benkired had been taking medication for anxiety, another for epilepsy, and Lyrica, which is used to treat neuropathic pain. Dahbia Benkired alleged that she was using the drugs to deal with the psychological pain she was suffering from selling her body on the streets of Paris. She said that she had taken 3 of the tablets the day before she attacked Lola, and she fell into a dark, violent state. When the judge inquired as to why she had never shared this information before now, the accused stated, "I know I killed a baby, an angel. She must be in heaven by now." When Dahbia Benkired was asked if the drugs is what drove her to rape and murder Lola, she said, yes, it was the drugs. She just wasn't herself that day. Then, on the 3rd day, the deranged young woman once again changed her story. Now the sequence of evil events that unfolded was because she was bewitched by her former boyfriend. Dahbia Benkired alleged that a man in his 30s, known as Fatah A., who was currently in prison and was on screen from his cell during the trial, had placed a spell of witchcraft on her. It was the evil spell that had led her to rape, torture, and murder the 12-year-old girl. The courtroom listened to the dark and dramatic and totally unbelievable tale the sick woman spun. She told the judges that it was Fatah that had led me to do it, and that she had no idea what she was doing. Dahbia Benkired claimed that when she was with him, he made her drink something that caused her to have hallucinations. Ever since then, she had viewed the world as upside down. She even described how he had taken her to a cemetery where he had buried children he had killed. And yet the accused provided no other information regarding this bizarre and shocking story. When her former boyfriend Fatah was asked about these allegations, he said, "I am baffled by what I just heard. I'm a stranger to all this." He testified to the court, "I had the impression that she was a little possessed. I had the impression that she was talking to people, that she saw me as someone else." Fatah clarified that he was in prison for divorce-related offenses, but that he didn't want Dahbia around his young son because of her immoral and unpredictable behavior. He described to the courtroom how, on a trip to the mall one day, she stole some candy, and this infuriated him because he wanted his son to be taught not to steal. Dahbia Benkired was void of any emotion, and she matter-of-factly explained to the court how she took all of her hatred and rage out on the poor girl. She didn't want to kill her, but she wanted to hurt someone, and knew that either way, Lola was going to die that day. Dahbia Benkired told the courtroom, "I took revenge on the little girl. She was a weaker person than me. I didn't choose her. It came suddenly. Since I had raped her, I might as well kill her." In shock and disgust, Lola Daviet's family in the courtroom had to listen to this woman speak about how, while Lola was suffocating on her own blood, she turned up the music loud and smoked a cigarette while the young girl's body shook and jolted, fighting for its last breath. During the trial, the courtroom filled with Lola Daviet's loved ones was further traumatized by the graphic, horrible images shown of her multiple injuries, including those inflicted upon her genitals. Several family members could not take any more and walked out of the courtroom. But her mother Delphine and brother Thibault remained there, watching and listening to every horrific moment their daughter and sister suffered at the hands of what they called the devil monster woman. They refused to turn their heads away or cover their ears. They were determined to receive justice for their Lola. When the horrific and disturbing images of Lola Daviet's injuries were displayed on screen in court, her murderer stared at the screen without any sign of emotion. At the trial, Delphine described her late daughter as her mini-me. She was a very social, loving, happy-go-lucky young girl, naive, always ready to help others. Her propensity for being a sweet, friendly, trusting little girl became her death sentence. Pictures of Lola Daviet as a vibrant, lovely little girl enjoying her life were projected on the courtroom wall. Delphine testified in the courtroom how she had always taught her children about being wary of strangers. Delphine stated how she used to tell them, and I quote, "If you're attacked, don't hesitate to scream. There will always be someone who will hear you." Then her daughter encountered what she described as this devil monster. "I couldn't save my Lola. My heart is forever broken," she told the courtroom. Delphine stressed to the judges how she not only lost Lola because of Dahbia Benkired, she lost her husband, her job, her home. Everything was gone, except for her son, which is the only reason she's still breathing. She looked at the devil monster, Dahbia Benkired, and said, "This thing won't take away the love in our family." Lola's grief-stricken mother pleaded with the court to not spare the accused any punishment. She deserves to be locked away forever. In a heart-wrenching moment during the trial, Lola's mother asked a forensic pathologist whether her daughter had suffered at the end, stating how she had been plagued, haunted by the question over the last 3 years. The expert told the mother the truth about asphyxiation and how it has 3 aspects. There are the physical, psychological, and emotional effects because the act induces extreme anxiety in the victim. Being unable to get oxygen to breathe is an intense and serious source of anxiety. The pathologist could not lie about the degree of how much her young daughter had suffered. Mitigating circumstances surrounding the accused backgrounds were presented by the defense at trial. Dahbia Benkired had a volatile, unhappy childhood. She had spent her years in both Algeria and France with cold, unaffectionate aunts and an abusive father. There had been a documented report of a domestic violence incident with a past boyfriend, a history of mental illness, and the claim she had made previously to the police about being a victim of rape. But 3 psychiatric experts said they had noted psychopathic tendencies in the accused, and they did not believe she suffered from any mental health condition that could be cured. A court psychiatrist who evaluated the accused testified as to how unsettled and frustrated she felt at not being able to find a diagnosis or reason for the horrific acts Dahbia Benkired had committed. The psychiatrist Corinne Jean told the court, in a quote, "In 15 years of expertise, this is the first time I felt this way. I found myself faced with a paralysis of my thoughts, a feeling of unease that catches in the throat." The doctor also shared with the courtroom how the accused was very interested in the media coverage surrounding the murder. This invested interest by the accused further supported the belief that Dahbia Benkired had strong psychopathic tendencies. When she was asked to respond to the psychiatrist's evaluation of her, she stated, and I quote, "I realized that I was talking nonsense to them." Her voice was strangely high-pitched and barely audible when she replied. According to the Attorney General, Dahbia Benkired was not simply out for revenge and targeted the young girl in a moment of rage. She was a predator who lured and trapped the girl to satisfy her own sexual pleasures. The prosecutor argued that the sentence must represent the depravity of the crime, the cruelty, the barbarity, and the severe suffering inflicted on both the victim and her family must be reflected in the defendant's punishment. Before she pled guilty to all charges and the judges sentenced her, she expressed remorse and apologized to Lola's family for her horrible actions. Dahbia Benkired stated, "I ask for forgiveness, and what I did is horrible. That is all I have to say." Her words felt choreographed, shallow, and meaningless. Outside the courtroom, hundreds of residents called for the death of Dahbia Benkired. But for the citizens of France, justice would prevail, even if death was not an option under the current law. While the verdict was being read, the presiding judge addressed the extreme cruelty of the criminal acts, which he called true torture and total dehumanization. In a moment that stunned all of France and much of the world, the judges handed down a life sentence. The sentence is what is referred to as an irreducible life sentence. This means that there is no possibility of parole or reduction in sentence. In France, a life sentence without parole specifically means that there is no chance of parole before serving a minimum of 30 years. After 30 years, a convicted offender may ask a judge to review the ban on their possibility of parole. Since Dahbia Benkired had been incarcerated for 3 years before her trial, this means she will have to serve 27 years before being able to request a review. This penalty may not sound severe enough to listeners in the United States and other countries who currently work under a crime control model of justice. However, in France, this is the longest sentence permitted under the law. It is extremely uncommon and is usually only granted to mass murderers, such as terrorists and serial killers. Capital punishment has been abolished in France since 1981. The maximum sentence of life imprisonment without parole, also known as perpétuité incompressible, was established in 1994 in response to some of the most brutal and shocking murders France had experienced in decades. It was designed to make prison a truly only about a dozen men, mainly serial killers and terrorists, had received the punishment. Michel Fournier, also known as the Ogre of the Ardennes, was convicted of killing 12 women. And Jahidus Salah Abdesalam, one of the terrorists behind the 2015 attack in Paris, which took the lives of 130 people, are two examples of the individuals who have received this sentence. 27-year-old Dahbia Benkired was the first woman in France to have been given a life sentence. This verdict was unprecedented and made a loud, bold statement to the people of France and the world that anyone who commits a sadistic, brutal murder, especially against a child, will face the most serious of consequences, no matter the gender of the offender. After she was sentenced to the most severe punishment under French law, Lola Daviet's brother, Thibault, expressed great gratitude to the justice system, stating his family is happy with the outcome and how the system has restored the memory of his sister. It has restored the truth. Lola's mother told the media that this was the case, even if it won't give us back our Lola. We believed in justice, and justice was received. Lola's mother, Delphine, and her brother, Thibault, were seen embracing and crying together after the historical verdict was read. They could finally breathe a little. Justice had come at last for their little Lola, and it was a step toward healing. The lawyer for the family, Clotilde Lepetit, spoke of how it fixed a wrong that had been waiting over 3 years to be reversed. Alexandre Vola, the lawyer for the now convicted Dahbia Benkired, stated that he was not at all surprised by the sentence and that his client had not decided whether or not she would appeal. It was difficult for anyone to deny that justice was not met once this historical verdict was delivered. However, for the National Rally Party, being given a life sentence for such a barbaric crime was still not enough. The subsequent deportation of violent foreign criminals must come after incarceration. I would presume that if or when Dahbia Benkired is granted parole, which would be shocking if she ever were, she will be deported back to her native country of Algeria. The country had waited for 3 years for justice to finally be given to Lola Daviet. She had become the stolen child of all of France, despite her parents' ongoing requests to not have their daughter's murder become political. Her death had ignited a debate around the due diligence of deportations and the threat of foreign nationals. Lola Daviet had become a symbol of justice reform, particularly in the area of protecting children. It also brought out more of an emphasis being placed on mental health support, as well as the reform of migration laws. I would like to first discuss this case through the framework of the French legal system. It is vastly different from the United States and Britain, and understanding these differences is critical to the way the case was handled, from the investigation to the sentencing. The justice system in France is a civil law system. The United States and Britain are both based on a system of common law, which relies heavily on and builds upon its prior case decisions. In contrast, France places a heavier reliance upon its statutes and applies relevant codes and regulations to the act and its parties. Each case is decided as an individual separate case from the next, with little to no reference to past court decisions. French law is divided into two areas of legislation: droit public or public law, which governs state and public bodies, and droit privé or private law, which governs private individuals and entities. The private law is further broken down into two sections. The first is droit civil, and the second is droit pénal, which governs criminal law. Similar to the United States, the highest importance is placed upon the rules set forth by the Constitution of France. The courts in France are split into administrative courts and judicial courts, with the latter handling all matters of civil and criminal law. The highest judicial court is the Supreme Court of Appeals, also known as Cour de Cassation. A unique aspect of French law is the Constitutional Council, also known as the Conseil constitutionnel. This is the third branch that oversees statutes before they become law, national elections, and address questions posed by citizens surrounding the legality of laws. This court includes 9 appointed members who are nominated by the president and confirmed by presidents of the 2 houses of parliament, the National Assembly, and the Senate. The first version of the French Constitution was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and its Citizens, established on August 26, 1789. Charles de Gaulle founded the council on October 4, 1858, a man who is most famously associated with the massive international airport outside Paris. There are 3 criminal courts established in France that handle varying levels of seriousness. The Tribunal of Police is composed of a single judge who determines cases of a minor nature, with potential fines not exceeding more than 3,000 euros and with no time in prison. The second level of crimes is determined by the Correctional Tribunal, which is made up of 3 judges. These judges handle more serious offenses, which are classified as délits under the Penal Code of France. Such crimes face penalties of up to 10 years in prison. The accusations within the first 2 criminal courts are presented by a prosecutor. The most serious of crimes are judged by the Cour d'Assises, which is composed of 3 professional judges and 9 jurors, in which they all deliberate together. It is not required that all jurors and judges come to a unanimous decision. Rather, the decision must be made based on a minimum of 8 votes. If a decision of a high crime is appealed, the jury in the Appellate Assize Court increases to 15, including 3 judges and 12 citizen jurors, with a majority of 10 needed to convict. I find it interesting how a jury is involved in appellate cases when only judges hear appellate cases in the United States. Also interestingly, there is no official transcript of the trial. The court clerk writes notes, but they are often done by hand during the proceeding, which becomes part of the records. But there is no complete word-for-word documentation of the event. This is strange to me, but I think because their case decisions are not based upon past court cases, maybe they don't see the purpose in keeping an official transcript of each case. Still, it seems as if there would be significance in having more official records. When an individual is held in custody, this is called garde à vue. Under French law, anyone arrested is read and given notice of rights that are very similar to Miranda rights in the United States. However, a defendant who invokes the right to remain silent is very rare in France, since remaining silent when the person is capable of explaining their circumstances is a strong indication of guilt. A person can be held for an initial 24 hours for investigative purposes. If it is deemed necessary for the investigation to go longer, the person can be held for an additional 24 hours under written authorization of the district prosecutor. For incidents of a more serious nature, such as drug trafficking or organized crime, this period can be further extended, with suspects of terrorist activity being held up to 6 days. However, only under written authorization by the judge of liberties and detention is this permitted. Criminal investigations in France are split into 2 general categories. The minor and simpler crimes are handled by the police and the public prosecutor. For more complex and serious offenses, these crimes are handed over to an investigating magistrate. It is recorded that more than 90% of criminal cases proceed with the police working along with the public prosecutor to investigate, and are never handed over to the magistrate. Investigating magistrates are located throughout the country, and under certain circumstances may collaborate as a team. Once a preliminary investigation has been performed by the public prosecutor, the investigating magistrate is then given authority to commence the investigation. There are some circumstances where a third party with a vested interest in the case may also file a complaint with the magistrate. This tends to be the victim or the victim's family, but it can also be a non-governmental organization. If their claim is approved, the status of the third party, this person or the group, then has access to the information and evidence which is gathered throughout the investigation. Once they have become a formal party to the investigation, then they are parties to the trial and any subsequent appeal. The scope of the investigation under the magistrate is restricted to the facts and the individuals who are listed in the order given by the public prosecutor. They ultimately determine whether a violation of the law has occurred and who the offender is. If the organization is shown to have evidence, which is significant and corroborated, that the individual or organization is criminally responsible for the act, they are brought to appear before the magistrate. They are then informed that they have been placed under a formal investigation, also known as mise en examen. The investigating magistrate has a plethora of tools to use with or without the assistance of the police, including what are known as dawn raids on the suspect's premises, wiretaps, and of course interrogation. Once an investigation has been finished, the investigating magistrate formally acknowledges its completion, and the files are then handed over to the public prosecutor, who reviews and submits observations in a formal document. It includes their opinion as to who, if anyone, should be charged and prosecuted in a trial. This document is copied and given to all parties of the investigation. However, in stark contrast to the United States, the investigating magistrate has more authority over the prosecutor, since they can bind a party over to trial, whether the prosecutor has recommended them to be or not. All parties are allowed to submit their own observations prior to a final decision being made. Unique to the French legal system, neither prosecutors nor judges are considered lawyers in France, in the sense that they are not members of the local bar, and they generally have not received professional training, which is applicable to lawyers. Most of the time, the outcome is one of two decisions. The investigating magistrate decides to dismiss the person and any associated charges, or the individual or organization is bound to trial. There is a third rare outcome, and that is when the magistrate declares that they are without jurisdiction to determine the direction of the case. The dismissal of a case can be appealed by the public prosecutor. Although the other parties can't typically appeal a decision, they are able to be active in the process and intervene to influence the investigation. This can include a formal request for an expert or to search for evidence that could be exculpatory. Before an individual is given the status of being under formal investigation, very little can be done to influence the investigation or prepare a defense. This is because it is very difficult for the defense counsel to obtain any information surrounding the investigation, as they are not allowed direct contact with any potential witness or counsel, since this would be perceived as an attempt to influence their testimony. This act would be considered a serious violation, and defense lawyers avoid making contact with witnesses in any matter, so it is not considered an issue. The investigating magistrate is unique to a legal system since they don't investigate for one side. Rather, their role is to investigate and gather evidence that could both be incriminating and exculpatory, meaning that it could lead to potential doubt regarding the guilt of the suspect. Unlike a homicide investigator in the United States, who searches for evidence to support the prosecution of an offender, the investigating magistrate is expected to uncover the truth behind what occurred. France does not have a legal term for homicide. Instead, it is divided into unintentional injuries versus intentional attacks on another person. Within the latter, the criminal code defines two types. The first is the intentional cause of a person's death, without premeditation, which is defined as murder. The second is premeditated murder or murder lying in wait, which is defined as an assassination. The intentional rate of death in France in 2023 was 1.3 per 100,000 residents, which is one, if not the lowest, in the European Union. Female offenders are exceptionally rare, with an estimation of their committing murder being as low as 6 per 1 million residents. Similar to studies performed in the United States and many other nations, most homicides are committed by youth. Crime data from 2016 to 2017 indicated that 320 women committed homicide in Paris. 57% of the offenders were under 36 years old. The majority of the incidents occurred in highly populated areas, with 30% in the urban areas of Paris. Of these female offenders, 44% were unemployed, and 9% were identified as foreign. There are 6 maximum security prisons and 7 maximum security sections within prisons in France. Many long sentences are carried out in detention centers or sections designed for such. Since female prisoners are rare, most of their facilities are within a separate section of the male prisons. In fact, only 2 out of the 59 criminal facilities are specifically designated to females in France. There are currently 480 individuals, which is 0.7% of criminals, serving a life sentence in France. There are 75,897 people who are currently incarcerated in France. Females comprise 3.3% of the prison population. Between January 2023 and 2024, the country did see an increase of 9.6%. in its female prisoners. Of these female prisoners, 23.2% were identified as foreign nationals. What is inarguably the most important and disturbing element of this case to discuss is the gender of the offender and the prevalence of female sex-based violence. As mentioned while discussing the trial, the Attorney General and prosecutor pointed out that the crimes committed by Dahbia Benkired were not simply out of revenge or rage. They were crimes committed by someone seeking to fulfill their own sick, perverse sexual fantasies or desires. Dahbia Benkired was a child predator, a vicious pedophile. Our society, even with more and more cases every year that involve women, has trouble grasping the concept of female predators. The typical image of the pedophile in people's minds still draws up a white older man who often works in the vicinity of children, such as a teacher or sports coach. A violent predator of children is the weird man who drives around in a windowless van. A woman in her early 20s, who by most standards of beauty would have been deemed to be attractive and physically fit, does not fit within the mold of a pedophile nor a predator in society's mind. Dahbia Benkired was the opposite of a criminal profile for either of these types of sexual offenders. It's only been in recent years that the media and the legal system have begun treating females who have inappropriate and illegal sexual contact with their underage students as the criminals they are. What a man under the same circumstances would be labeled as a rapist and a pedophile, women have been painted as being misunderstood, desperately lonely, and mentally ill. The media has gone so far as to encourage the narrative of this being a young boy's ultimate fantasy, getting with the hot older teacher. This is not a new portrayal by any means, as it has been commonly depicted in all forms of media. Fortunately, today, female educators who prey on young, vulnerable males or females are being cast in a different and more dangerous light than in previous decades. The research done on female sexual predators yields very conflicting results, depending on what sources the data has come from. Hence lies a big reason as to why they are not part of the stranger danger equation or conversation most parents have. But studies show their prevalence is much higher than expected. One research study based on 232 sexual offense arrests of women from 2001 in 21 U.S. states discovered that of the women arrested for sexual offenses, 45% were co-offenders. Research on female co-offending has revealed that some of them also engage in abuse on their own, before or after co-offending with a partner, typically male. A more recent study done in 2015 that analyzed all sexual crime incidents between 1992 and 2011 across 37 states showed that out of the 802,150 sex crimes that were reported, 5.4% were committed by females. Of the 43,018 incidents involving females, 38.1% were committed with a co-offender, with 85% of them being male. What was shocking to learn from the study is that 61.9% of the cases that were committed by women alone, indicating that 2/3 of all sexual offenses committed by females are done on their own, without any force, coercion, or abuse by a co-offender. The belief that a female who commits sexual offenses is almost always accompanied or forced by a male partner is a lie. It is a myth that perpetuates the idea that females are victims and they are innocent, or at least less culpable, of the crime. A meta-analysis based on 17 samples from 12 different countries showed that sexual offenses committed by females reported to police were approximately 2.2% of all incidents. However, in shocking contrast, victimization surveys revealed the prevalence of such offenses to be as high as 11.6%, which is almost 6 times higher than the official crime data. Males were much more likely to self-report that their offender was a female. 40% of males reported they were molested or abused by a female, versus only 4% of females who reported their offender was a woman. Another unofficial source supported the disturbing truth about female sexual offenders. Data from the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children revealed that 5% of girls and 44% of boys who reported abuse through the Child Helpline claimed to have been abused by a female. A meta-analysis of female sexual offenders in 12 countries unearthed a similar alarming pattern. Officially reported crimes indicate that they account for around 2% of sexual offenders. However, when victimization data was exclusively evaluated, 12% of all sexual offenders were female. Much of this conflicting data stems from the fact that many health professionals, as well as law enforcement, don't perceive females as being sexual abusers or predators. Too often their victims are not believed. Other adults explain away the actions of the female offender as behavior that was misunderstood or misread by the victim in some way. This is particularly true when the offender is the victim's relative, especially when it is their mother's. Instead of being supported and given compassion, victims are told they must have misinterpreted how their mother touched them. It was a figment of their imagination, or even a fantasy. When a female does sexually offend, they are frequently portrayed as the co-offender of a man who forced them to participate, or at least that is how they depict their role in the offense. Or the woman must have been severely mentally ill to have committed such a sick act against a child. Or even more dangerous is the notion that when a female sexually offends, little to no harm is done. All of these beliefs align with the long-held traditional view of female criminals. Females who commit sexual homicide constitute approximately 5% of all known offenders. Due to this very low rate of female sexual offenders being arrested, much less charged and convicted of such offenses, it remains a low prioritized area of study. There is very little research that has been conducted on female sexual offenders, much less female sexual murderers. Homicide arrests between 1976 and 2022 showed that females accounted for 11.6% of offenders. Of these homicide offenders, 6,201 cases were defined as sexual murders. An analysis of 158 single-victim cases revealed some interesting characteristics and patterns of female sexual murderers. The average age was 27.9, with 75.3% being between the ages of 18 and 39 years old. Female sexual murderers targeted acquaintances in 42% of the incidents, and 33.9% were strangers. 76.6% of these homicides were committed in areas with higher populations. Firearms were used in 63.9% of the murders. For society to believe that girls and women are capable of purposely and knowingly sexually harming children, including committing violent acts that lead to their deaths, we must let go of ingrained perceptions and preconceptions surrounding females. Not all females are kind, nurturing, nor are they protective of children. Not all females are trustworthy. Many females are just as dangerous and predatory as males can be. Females can target, manipulate, and harm children. Females can be sexual offenders. Girls and women can be sick, twisted, and depraved for the sheer reason of wanting to inflict harm, control, and seek to fulfill their own vile sexual pleasures, just as boys and men can. The sooner societies acknowledge and accept this fact, the less likely an innocent child will fall prey to a sadistic female predator like Dahbia Benkired. Thank you so much for listening to the tragic, heartbreaking story of Frances Lola Daviet. For those of you who aren't already aware, I alone am Shades of Murder, and it's a true labor of love. I know there are countless true crime podcasts out there, and your support listening and following the show means the world to me. But I need your help to grow the podcast. And the best way you can do this is make sure you're following or subscribed, of course, and rate it, leave a review, and share the show with a friend. It's easy, free, and will only take a moment of your time. Each one of your voices and your support truly makes a difference. If you are on Spotify, underneath the title and cover art, there is a gear or 3 dots. You just click on that and you can rate from there. If you prefer to leave a rating and a review on Apple, you can simply scroll down the page of the show, select a rating, and then tap on Write a Review. Alternatively, you can leave reviews on the platforms Castbox, Podchaser, Audible, and through Amazon Music. Reviews don't have to be long or complicated. You can simply tell me what your favorite episode has been so far or what kind of cases you would like to hear more about. Sharing your thoughts and comments about the show with other potential listeners is the best way to support the show and help it grow. Your support means the world to me, and if you let me know you left a review, I would be thrilled to read it on the next episode. Again, thank you so much for listening. Until next time, stay safe and watch out for shades of murder happening in the streets, next door, especially inside your own home. Shades of Murder is created, researched, written, and edited by Alita Caldwell. Original music Stranger, composed by Stereo Code.